everybody. This is Heike Yates, and welcome to another episode of the Pursue Your Spark podcast. My guest today is Vonne Jacobs. Vonne is the principal and founder of Creating Quality LLC, a global strategic advisory and consulting firm that helps individuals and organizations design and implement simple, practical solutions to complex problems. As an experienced healthcare attorney, Vonne helps healthcare providers working in underserved communities manage their regulatory risks so that they can focus on providing high-quality care for those who need it the most. In addition, as a transformational professional coach, Vonne advances equity in the legal profession by helping Black women attorneys discover who they are and what they want so they can create careers and, more importantly, lives where they thrive. And something I did not know, Vonne is a lover of bourbon and an advocate of Black women everywhere. Vonne loves spending her days getting into good drink, good music, and good trouble. I love this. Welcome to the show, Vonne.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
What kind of bourbon do you drink?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. Right now, I am on a kick with Uncle Nearest, which is actually a new whiskey that came out of a company that was founded by a woman who is related to and associated with the family of the man who taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. So Jack Daniels grew up in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and there was a Black man there named Uncle Nearest. Well, they called him Uncle Nearest. His name was Nearest Green. And he taught little Jack how to make whiskey. And then Jack created Jack Daniels. And so she learned the story, got in touch with the family, and actually have bottles. I'm looking over here because I have 2 bottles sitting up here in my office of Uncle Nearest. And so that's what I've been drinking lately. But I love anything that's got a nice, warm caramel, smooth finish. You know, good Pappy 23, never hurt anybody.
So, ladies, if you're into bourbon, you got to talk to Vonne because I know nothing about. You asked me about wine. I'm a lot more versatile in wine, but I'm like,
we're gonna have to get together and we'll do a tasting. I'll get you in. I'll give you a little intro tasting. We'll talk.
Oh, that could be fun. I would love it. But what I like to let my listeners know is how I met, if possible, how I met my guests. And our story was just fun. And that's how I saw you presenting at the summer camp. And I just loved your story. And I invited you onto the show and you said yes. But we met at summer camp. How cool is that?
I know, right? Because I didn't even go to camp as a kid. But I went to camp at 43 and made all sorts of new amazing friends. So it was great.
So summer camp was a virtual event that recently just happened, put on by Heather Joy Hubbard. And it was just such a fun event and so educational and so enlightening. And we, like I said, I've never been like you, Vonne, I've never been to camp, but that was just fun. And we learned a lot and we met so many awesome other women and a few men.
Yeah. Actually, it was really good. I know Heather had this big idea that nobody got when she tried to explain it to them that we're going to have a virtual summer camp, but it turned out to be an amazing, amazing event.
It was.
So it was a lot of fun.
And so in that same sense along those, we're talking about the power of choice and breaking free from other people's expectations. So I saw you present at summer camp, but my audience doesn't know who you are other than from the introduction and that you love bourbon and that you're just some real cool chick. And I wish we could see each other and we're on the same part of the East Coast, so we're not that far away. But tell our audience, how was it? Where did you grow up? Who are you?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I am from a small town in South Carolina called Orangeburg, South Carolina. And it is a very interesting place because it is a small southern town, but it's the home of 2 historically Black colleges and universities. So I had a lot of higher education influence in my life, even as a young kid in a small town. So I had people ever since I was a little kid encouraging me to go to law school. So that's what I did because I like to argue and I was a smart little girl and never had a problem telling people what I thought. And so people were like, you should go to law school. And so I did. And I enjoyed it, but I never really thought about until much, much later in my life what it is I actually wanted to do. I knew what I was good at, I knew what people expected of me. And I didn't have any sort of visceral objection to any of that. So I did that. But I never spent any time until I got much, much older um, thinking about exactly what is it that I want to do and sort of what is the impact I want to have on the world. So part of how I got to sort of the summer camp experience and telling that story was that I had been working and practicing law for a very long time, and it was just wearing on me. And I was in a work environment that was not supportive of me physically or emotionally or mentally. And I really started to pay the price for that. And I ended up actually getting very, very sick
Now, let
and
me ask
almost
you,
dying.
Juan, hold on.
Yes.
What type of law were you studying?
So I actually am a healthcare lawyer. So it's the healthcare law, actually. So I was representing hospitals and health systems and healthcare providers. And from a regulatory standpoint, so healthcare in the United States is one of the most complex industries ever. And there are tons and tons of rules. And so I'm one of those people that helps people figure out what the rules are and how they're supposed to work so that people can try to stay out of jail and out of trouble. And and so I was doing that work, and I was working 80, 90 hours a week, which isn't uncommon for lawyers in corporate settings, but it's a lot. And I wasn't taking care of myself, and my body just decided it was no longer interested in being a part of that scenario. And so I had a major health issue, and that's the tattoo that I have on my wrist, actually.
Guys, we're
Is
also have a video.
yeah, it's my literal EKG from the day that I died. So I went tachycardic. They stopped my heart and then they restarted it. So I
Now,
call this tattoo perspective.
now you were in hospital, so you were at work and you broke down.
So I
You,
wasn't even at work. I had been grinding, grinding, grinding. So I worked at a law firm, but represented hospitals and health systems. And so I had been working, 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 and I had gotten up that day and my heart was just pounding. So I'm curled up in my bed at home, trying to convince myself to sit up, like trying to talk my body into sitting up so that I can go to work. And my heart is racing and I cannot sit up. And I'm just trying so hard to convince myself because I just was of the mindset that I have to go to work. This is the thing that they're paying, you have to go do it. And my body was just like not having it. And thankfully, I was blessed and still am blessed to have friends who have better sense than I do and called to check on me and heard what was going on. And my friend Susan came and got me and took me to the hospital where they were like, your heart rate is 190. We're admitting you immediately. And they literally had to give me drugs to stop my heart because they couldn't get a solid rhythm and then restart it. And yeah.
you were basically dead.
Yes, I was dead. Like I had the whole seeing, I could see the whole thing like floating above myself, see the whole story. There were these nurses scrambling around. There was this beautiful, I still remember his face, this beautiful nurse to this side of me, putting an IV in, trying to finally, and ended up having to put it in my neck because he couldn't get a blood vessel anywhere else. But he was gorgeous. I remember his face.
Well, it's a
And
good memory to die with that,
I know
right?
if I'm gonna die, at least I got to die looking at something beautiful. And all these people are scrambling, and my friend Krista is at the door of the bay where they have me. Krista is calling my mother, who she has never spoken to and never met, to tell her, "Hi, you don't know me. My name is Krista. I work with your daughter. We're at Vanderbilt. They're about to stop her heart, but they say they can restart it." That is the first conversation Krista had with my mother.
Where does your mother live?
My mother lives in Orangeburg, South Carolina still. So she's still in hometown.
Yeah.
And which from Nashville was about an 8-hour drive.
Okay.
So because I was in Nashville at the time when this happened. And so that was my first wake up call. But because I happened to be one of these people that, needs to get smacked in the face a couple times, I had a couple more wake up
Let me
calls.
backtrack. So you're looking at this gorgeous nurse and you're going, I'm going to heaven. This is actually not so bad because I'm looking at something gorgeous. And then they woke you back up.
And then they woke me up, and it wasn't until they woke me back up that I really sort of got that I actually almost died trying to do a job that I didn't really like all that much anymore for a reason I couldn't articulate.
Okay.
Because it wasn't really what I wanted per se. It's just what I had been doing and what I had trained to do and spent all that money and education and time getting to the point to be able to do. But I'd never really thought about, well, is there any other way to live my life? I'd never questioned it. And it wasn't until I woke up and I was like, I almost died for a job that I'm not even sure I really like anymore. That's probably not a good thing.
So what happened then? You were woken up, you came to this realization, and how long do you stay at the hospital?
So I was in the hospital for a few
Follow-up.
days and I got diagnosed with lupus, with an autoimmune disorder called lupus. And so I did 6 months of chemo after that, where I had infusions um, once a month for 6 months of basically chemotherapy drugs, which meant for at least 2 weeks out of the month, I was basically useless because I was either getting the infusion and recovering from that.
Mhm.
That would take me about 2 weeks. And then I was still working because I, again, not being able to put these things together correctly, was still under the impression that I needed to show up and go to work. And they didn't disavow me of that impression either.
They said, "Great, you're here."
But it was one of these things where like, it's great you're here, but you're not the same Vonne. You're not working the same way you used to. And I'm like, well, I physically can't. But so there was this, it was when I really started to understand that you have to advocate for yourself because people will do to you what you let them do to you. And circumstances will perpetuate themselves if you allow them to do that. But until you interrupt that pattern, it will just keep going. And so that was my first sort of lesson on interruption.
Very good. It's like, I think the realization is really what we all need. Like the wake up call in your party was a dramatic wake up call. It was not just like, oh, somebody bumped you. You died and came back and you said, oh my God, what have I done to myself? And when did you get the tattoo on?
So I didn't get the tattoo until much later.
Okay, we'll hold
I
on
got
to that, John. We hold on to that because that's a good story too, or part of the story, I think. But
yeah.
so you got smack dab in the head and you got chemotherapy and you went back to work and they said, hey, you're not the same person. You're not producing as well.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, well, I can't do that anymore because I just physically at the time couldn't do it. And I thought, well, maybe it's just being in a law firm. And if I moved and went and worked for a company instead of being in a law firm, because the theory is that life as a lawyer inside a company is somehow less stressful and less work. It actually is not, but that's the story they tell you, right? So I decided to go in-house. So I went to go work for a hospital. And the hours were probably more reasonable relative to the already tremendously unreasonable law firm hours, but they were not hours conducive to a healthy life, in my opinion. And they really weren't about it wasn't set up for that. That's just not how it's set up. But I worked at in-house and I was doing that and I was like, okay, it's going to be better because I'm in-house now and it's going to be easier. It's not easier. It's just a different sort of crazy. Um, you know, again, people will do and take as much from you as you allow them. And I still was learning how to say no and learning how to say, here is my boundary. And I hadn't quite got good at that yet. So even in that job, I ran up against sort of the same kind of, well, if you're going to keep showing up here and giving us 80, 90 hours of work, we're going to take them all. And we're going to continue to do these things. And we're not going to recognize your effort. And we're not going to remember that you're actually providing value because you keep showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left there because I thought,
Okay, you did
well,
one evil for the next evil. And then what was next?
so the next evil was like, well, maybe it's just that was the wrong company. So then I was like, well, I'm just going to go to this different company, right? That was my it was an academic setting. So the first place I went was like a corporate hospital sort of setup. The second place I went was more of an academic setting. And I thought, okay, well, of course, in academia, it's going to be everyone loves and everybody's so calm and relaxed, and we get summers off. And yeah, none of that.
What?
None of that. It was yet another environment where I realized that, and this third place is really where I got this lesson, which was, again, people will do to you what you let them. When are you going to love yourself enough and value yourself enough to say no? That is where I learned how to say no.
How?
That I had gotten into some personal development work sort of in along the way, and I met a person who is currently my coach, one of my coaches, Mia Lamott, at a jazz concert actually. And she told me about this training that she had done, this transformational training, and she gave me a free gift card for the first little session. So I went to that. That opened up a lot of stuff for me. Again, just sort of showing me myself and showing me how I was presenting myself to the world as a victim, as someone who could be taken advantage of.
Can you give an example of something?
So, okay, so an example would be I joined that last company, that last place, under the impression that I was going to be basically, so the head of the department, their deputy, and then me, right? And there were a bunch of us that were on that sort of third level, but we were supposedly equal. That was my impression. That was what was presented to me sort of in my offer letter and the way I understood our relationship. But it turns out that that was not the conversation that the company had had with itself, and that there was a person who had the same title as me who had been told that she was my boss.
Oh.
And I had been having some conflict with her because I didn't understand why she thought she could tell me what to do. Because in my mind, I don't work for you. But in her mind, I did work for her. And so I didn't learn that until towards the very end of my tenure there. But it was one of those things that just sort of showed me um, that I had not really, instead of sort of focusing on my conflict with her, I really should have been having that conversation with the head of the department and getting clarity around what the roles and expectations were on the front end instead of after everything is evolved. So it was one of these things where, well, I just kind of showed up and smiled and said, I'll do whatever you tell me and do whatever you want me to do because I just, I'm just so happy to be here, as if I wasn't bringing anything to the table.
You know what? I think a lot of women can relate to that. They're really not valuing their value for themselves. And they go in and say, here I am. Don't you see how amazing I am? And they're like, oh, no, we're just going to work you to death. They're crazy.
Yeah, it really, and learning how to stand in that worthiness is what I've learned through coaching and transformational training, sort of personal development work, is I am worthy. Like that is one of the first things that I put in sort of my little mantra. I am worthy. I am bringing value. My presence and my existence is adding something to this equation that would not otherwise be here. And so that is something that we get to acknowledge and celebrate, and that I get to stand in and say, yay, yay for me. And then the second part of it is I get to choose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I came to understand is that I, in not standing in my worthiness and not advocating for myself the way I would for any client or any friend or honestly any stranger, I was choosing to be disrespected. I was in not advocating and not making a stand. I was making a choice. I didn't think I was. I thought, well, this is just happening to me. They're doing it to me. No, I was participating. I was choosing to stand there and get smacked around.
Mm-hmm.
I had to choose. I had to decide what was worth, what it was worth to me to be able to get up and be excited about what I was doing that day. And so I made a different choice. I chose to stand in my worthiness, and I chose to say, here are my boundaries, here are my needs, here are my parameters for my continued participation in this environment. They couldn't meet those, and so I chose to leave.
How? So you had to tell them that you're going to leave, and they said what?
Okay.
They said, okay.
Yeah.
They're like,
I mean,
okay, out of here, replace you with somebody else.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And you know what? When you worked with your development coach, self-development coach,
Yeah.
and got all these empowering messages, how did you, a better word doesn't come to mind, how did you digest them? How did you put them into action at the current place where you work in before you decided to leave? Or were you able to do that, or did you do that afterwards?
I was trying. I think what happened while I was in that environment was a lot of awareness, right? I was coming to into understanding what was happening and what my role in was in what was happening. And so that was happening while I was in the environment. It wasn't probably until I left and actually, well, it was when I said, these are my boundaries, these are my parameters. And they said, no. And I said, okay, well, I'm leaving. I've got to create something new for myself. And that was when I really had to apply more of that, information and more of those skills and into creating a new life for myself, because I'd never worked for myself.
Yeah. When you
I
think
always
about
had
it too, Vaughn, it's like you're in a company where you're undervalued, you're giving it your all, you're trying to have strategies to integrate yourself or make them understand what you're doing. And then on the other hand, they're just like, okay, well, here you go, here's my offer, here are my boundaries. And they're like, no, there's no negotiating. There's no like coming back with like, oh, these are your boundaries. Okay, this is what we expect. There was no conversation whatsoever. They seem to just chew you out, replace you.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, and that's what it felt like, which was again sort of a new concept for me. I'm a straight A student. I win everything I do, like and this felt like losing. Honestly, it turned out not to be a loss. It turned out to be probably the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But in the middle of it, when when you really get shown that the brochure isn't accurate, right? That the we love you and please be in all our pictures, because I was also one of the only Black people in the office.
Oh
So
God.
I'm in every diversity brochure, I'm on every description, and yet that love isn't real. That's not love, right? It was like, well,
We
we'll
need
just,
a black one, we need an orange
yeah,
one, and we need a green one.
we got to have we need to balance out the picture. So we're going to put you in all the pictures, but we don't really mean that we want you to stay and we really value you here. We
So
don't mean that.
what prompted you to quit? What happened at was there like a peak or a moment where you said, that's it, I'm done? Or did you like plan for it? If they're not meeting my guidelines or my demands at this point, I'm going to leave.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I would say I had a plan in the sense that because I am a planner just by nature, I have 40 breakout scenarios for what could happen. Disaster planning is what I'm trained to do. So that's what I do. But I never believed, I think, until there was a meeting that I had with not the head of the department, but her deputy, where I was laying everything out and I was practically in tears. And I don't cry. I am not a crier. And I was practically in tears, and I was just like begging desperately for him to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And he just kind of was like, there's nothing I can do. There's just, I'm like, I hear you. I think everything you're saying is accurate. Because it was particularly about my relationship with the person who thought she was my boss, that no one told me was my boss. And he was like, yes, you're accurate. That she does behave that way. She does that to everybody. We all can't stand it, but they've all been able to carve out their own sort of havens. I don't have anywhere to go. I'm asking you to help me. And he was just kind of like, yeah, I got nothing. And so I was like, well, then what is the point? like, that was when I think the heartbreak set in, is what I would call it. The heartbreak that, okay, no one's coming to save me, and this isn't going to be fair. Like there is no redemption in this scenario, in the sense that there's no sort of superhero coming in to make it all better.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to decide either that I'm willing to just be miserable for the sake of having this job and the security that comes with it, or I am going to choose my happiness and my health, honestly, and take a shot on me, because I now have to go out under my own name and on my own dime and on my own merit, and create something for myself.
And you did that.
And I did it.
So
I did it. I am very proud. I did it. And I am happier than I've ever been and ever thought I could be working every day, But yeah, I had to really figure out for myself, what did I do? If I'm going to die doing something, what is that thing that I'm going to die doing? And that place just wasn't going to be it. I did not want to die being miserable for the sake of the ease of someone else.
Yeah. So you took all the stuff you learned from Mia and you said, I'm creating my own company.
Yes.
You created Creating Equality LLC. Is that what it is?
Creating Equity.
Equity, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Creating Equity LLC. Okay, so this was your first own baby, so to speak, your own company. You're the boss. You call the shots. You tell it as it is, and you work as many hours as you want.
Yes. So what happened is, when I left that job, I was like, well, I was still in the mindset that I only know how to do one thing, which is be a healthcare lawyer. So what I started out was, I created a consulting firm that was a healthcare consulting firm that did healthcare consulting. It's basically the same job I was doing before, but under my own umbrella.
Uh-huh.
And that was a safe choice, relative. I knew how to do that stuff. I had relationships with those kinds of clients and those kinds of people. I had a bit of a reputation that I'd created because I'd been engaged in a lot of professional associations. And so people knew who I was and knew I was good. And so it was an ease of entry kind of thing. But as I was doing that work, I was like, there's more. There's something more than just me writing these contracts and sort of, putting together these policies. There's something else I can contribute. And I was trying to figure out what that was. And I've always just been driven by this pursuit of justice and fairness and equity. And in the last year, I have really come to understand what that means and what it could look like in terms of me using all of my legal and business skills to create equity in the world. And that is why I shifted my company, and from just healthcare consulting, plus all these other skills I've kind of been picking up along the way, and really thinking about, okay, well, what is your purpose, Vonne? What are you here to do? I am here to I am committed to creating an equitable world. And so every piece of my company now, which is why the name was changed to Creating Equity, is dedicated to that purpose.
I see.
So that's, it's one of these things where I eased into it. I didn't do a full leap, but I took little leaps. I'm taking bigger leaps now, though, because I now trust myself more, I think.
Yeah, I think when you initially start out, we all have an idea, but then as you keep dabbling in that business, you're like, oh, I have all these skills, but my passion is that niche, and how can I build out that niche to serve what I think needs to be served and is underserved as you do. And then you put the pieces of the puzzle together and create that dream of yours. And I think that dream continues to grow as you grow.
Yeah.
It probably will pivot again once more, because you shared with me one of your dreams, which is?
Oh gosh, which one of these?
One of these. I want to do a TEDx talk, you said.
Oh yes, yes. This is so how I even got to do summer camp, right? And one of the keynotes at summer camp, one of the speeches was because in my mastermind that I'm a part of with Heather, she took us through this exercise where we were all like woo woo, having a good time, dancing to some music. And she asked us, what's your big goal for 2020? And I said, I want to give a TEDx talk. I want to talk on a stage about something that is not about the law. And I did not realize that was what was going to come out of my mouth, honestly, because I'd never consciously thought about that. But the minute I said it, I was like, it's true. It is also the scariest thing that I've ever said out loud. Because I have no problem getting on a stage and talking about the law. And I mean, I've been doing that for almost 20 years. I love that part. But the TEDx stage is not about that. The TEDx stage is about your story, your personal journey through life. I'd never told my story before. So summer camp was the first place I had publicly told my story.
And you did a damn good job, I have to say, because from all the stories that were amazing I heard, and I was like, I was hearing you speak and you could have a chat window open while you're on virtual. And I'm like, I want you on my podcast. Contact me. People need to hear your story.
Oh, thank you so much. It was one of the best things. I mean, like, it was scary, as probably most, awesome things are at some point. And it was so fulfilling because I realized I can do hard things.
Nice.
I've been doing hard things my whole life, but for some reason, this hard thing seemed impossible. And yet, once I said yes to it, and it really was sort of the saying yes and the committing to showing up, it all kind of fell into place. And people were really into it, which I wasn't sure was going to happen.
Yep.
I was like, my commitment was to tell it. I don't know what people are going to do with it, but
I
people
felt
were into it.
you had a TEDx talk right there and then. I tell you, Vonne.
It was great. I mean, like, I'm so grateful to Heather because she really did give me my stage. Because once COVID hit, I thought I was off the hook, right? Because I was like, well, I can't do it now. It's not my fault, right? Like, how we get to deal with our big goals. Like I said, I would have done it, but COVID said we all have to stay home, and they're not doing stages anymore. So I'm just gonna sit back and never, And Heather was like, I will have none of that. I will just build you a stage, and you will still get up there and tell your story.
It was awesome. And that's why I wanted my listeners to hear that story, because there's so much depth to it. And when we prepared for the interview, we could have talked for hours, guys. We were like all over the place and all these cool things. And we're like, we got to tighten this down a little bit. Otherwise, they're going to go, what? 2 hours later, they're still talking? So we're trying to narrow it down, and we want to have Vonne come back at a later time and keep us up to date with what's going on with her life now. But as a transformational professional coach, what do you exactly do, or how do you approach Black women attorneys to help them?
So honestly, what I do as a coach is I coach the person I was 10 years ago. So the girl who is frustrated and heartbroken and exhausted and realizing that the story in the brochure isn't real, and that the system that you thought was going to work one way, it was never set up to work like that. And you have an opportunity to choose whether you're going to stay there and play that game, because you can do that, right? You can stay and play that game with the understanding of how it works, or you can create a new scenario for yourself. And so I take the lessons that I've learned and the skills that I've gathered, and I help the woman I was 10 years ago try to get to where I am now in a little bit shorter time without the almost dying.
Yes. Because I think that many of us, and I can, like, when you just said this, I can just pinpoint some of my clients that are attorneys. And what you're saying, I was like, yep, that's what they tell me all the time. This is where they are, and they're having their dreams, but they're so stuck in this 80, 90 hour a week, and I'm busting my butt for something that I don't really want to be there. I believe in the cause, let's put it that way, in the work I do, but the rest is just, it's not happening for me. I don't have a life.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you're in law school and when you're in sort of the industry, the messaging is such an echo chamber, right? So you never even get a chance to think about whether there is another way to do this. Is there another way to leverage these skills and this knowledge that I have to have the impact in the world that I want to have without having to literally sacrifice myself? I think I said in the talk, sacrifice myself on the altar of someone else's dream.
Yeah, you said that. Yeah.
Because that's what it feels like. At least that's what it felt like for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is when you think about the, particularly I think the American culture is all about just take, 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 and there's very little give from the workforce.
Yeah, it's a hustle and grind mentality, right? And a lot of people get ground to dust
Mm-hmm.
in that machine. And if you have an opportunity to help someone sort of stick their head up and go, wait a minute, there's a whole giant world out here that I could be doing, being a part of and really enjoying, and that there's a way to do that without starving and without sort of throwing everything away. Because I think that's one of the stories we tell ourselves as well. I spent all this time and money getting these degrees and getting to this place, and I'm going to just throw it all away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not throwing it out. You're going to take every bit of that experience with you wherever you go. But, to me, throwing it away is to say, I'm just going to be miserable with all of this instead of taking a chance and believing in me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what do you think the hardest part in that whole transformation up till now has been for you?
it's my constant conversation is a worthiness conversation. And it has evolved, but it's still a worthiness conversation, and that, which is why I made it my mantra, because it is just hard, I think, to own that in the depths of your soul sometimes, that you are inherently worthy, that I don't have to do anything, that I'm 100% whole and complete, and that my very existence is an affirmation of my worthiness. um, that is sort of my nirvana point. And so everything that I do and all of the work that I do to remind myself and others is really a conversation trying to reaffirm for ourselves our own worthiness.
Yes.
Because once you understand that and get that, the rest of the stuff kind of flows from that. But until you believe that you're worthy to have a good life, and however you define good, I'm not even telling you what good looks like, but however you define good, you are worthy of having a good life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would you say to our listeners, how, if they find themselves in a situation similar to what you described, what would you tell them to do, or what would their first steps be? And yeah.
My first suggestion, and it's going to sound, I'm laughing because I can hear me telling this to myself 10 years ago, and I can see the face I would have made, but it works. So I will say this: get in a room and get still and quiet. Just let yourself, because we don't make space for quiet and stillness. There's always the TV, the radio, something's going on. Get in a room and get still and quiet and just ask yourself, who am I and what do I want? And it's a harder question than some people may think it is. But if you sit still and give yourself an opportunity to hear what you already know, this is the thing, we already know this stuff. Because again, we were designed with that internal understanding, but we've sort of somehow shut ourselves off. But if you get still and quiet and just listen to what your heart and your soul are telling you, you'll start to come to see new things and sort of see what's working for you and what's not. And then you can plan around that. Like the strategy part for me, which is the part I love, but it's also one of the easiest parts. The soul work is the key, because the strategy you can create, but if you don't know what you're aiming for, then it doesn't matter what your strategy is.
Do you write it down, or?
I write it down because I write everything down. Some people, I mean, I'm again, lawyer by training. I have 25 of these little journals that I keep all over the place. And because I'm a visual learner, and that just sort of works for me. But some people just say it to themselves, just kind of sort of listening and just knowing it for yourself may be enough. But I like to write it down because I can come back to it and go, okay, that still rings true for me, or no, that doesn't ring true for me anymore. Because you'll, like you were saying, as you grow, as you develop, as you learn more things, you're going to shift. And that's beautiful, because if you're not growing, you're dead. And again, I kind of did that already. So I want to be in this sort of state of curiosity. This sort of space of curiosity about what wonderful things does God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, have for me if I'm willing to listen and receive. So just stillness, quiet.
And that brings me to, when did you get the tattoo? Because I
don't know. I got the tattoo when I quit.
The last job you quit.
The last job I quit, I went and got this tattoo, and my friend Karan went with me. And I said, I need to have something to remind me why I quit. And this is sort of, like I said, it's my perspective. Mm-hmm. Because I could be dead, and I was almost dead. So whenever I get freaked out about, oh my gosh, where's the next client coming from? Or, oh my gosh, how am I going to give this talk? How am I going to do that? I literally look at my wrist and go, okay, it's figure outable, as Marie Forleo would say.
Yeah, that's right. He's like, but it's a good reminder, because you're like, we all go crazy and doing stuff. You're like, oh my God. And then you look at it and you're like, okay.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I wanted a tattoo as opposed to a piece of jewelry or something, because I wanted to never be without it.
Yeah.
So unless somebody chops off my arm, I will always have this reminder. And if somebody chops off my arm, then I guess that'll be my reminder,
Yeah, but it's like one way or another, whatever works for people. But
but however you just some way of reminding yourself and recentering yourself, because it's gonna get hectic. It's gonna get hard. You're gonna want to quit. You're gonna want to cry. You're gonna want to scream. All that's normal and acceptable. But if you have something that helps you stay centered on your why, you'll make it.
Now, where's Vonne going from here? What are the plans at this point? Do you have already created so much amazing venues, but what's on the plate for you next?
So I just launched a new nonprofit and Facebook sort of community organization with my partner, Linda Marie Miller, called One Shared Humanity. And that is sort of the community arm of my Creating Equity. And through that, we are actually going to start addressing all of, we call them the isms that separate people. So we are going to get messy and start talking about and having what we're calling courageous conversations about racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and all of the religious, persecution and discrimination, all of the things that we use to separate ourselves. We're going to get into it, and we're going to talk about why those things are, how they persist, and what we can do to shift those narratives so that we really come to understand that we are one shared humanity, and all anybody wants to do is live free. That's all any person wants to do, is live free. And how can we do that? So I'm doing that. I'm doing the professional coaching, and that program is launching, and I'm still running my healthcare consulting. But my healthcare consulting is very much focused on rural and other underserved communities, because I want to address healthcare disparities, And that is my focus on creating equity in that arena, because it's an arena I know. How can I support those providers who are out there in the middle of nowhere or in those urban communities that don't have resources, that don't have the talent that they need, that don't have the expertise? How can I support them so they can take care of people? So that, again, we can live free, healthy lives, which is all anybody wants. So I'm doing a lot of stuff, but it's all centered around however I can, wherever I am, promoting and creating equity. So
That's awesome. That's such a good message. Vonne, where can people reach you on social or any other handles?
So I am Vonne Jacobs on Facebook. We are also at One Shared Humanity on Facebook. You'll find me there. And then my website is launching soon. It is not quite launched, but it's almost done. I did the proofs yesterday at vonnejacobs.org. And so you can find me at Vonne. If you want to email me, it's vonne@vonnejacobs.org. But if you look me up on Facebook, it's Vonne Jacobs. And I think on Instagram, I'm Vonne Michelle, because that is my name.
Yes, took me a while to find you. I'm like, where is she?
Yeah, I think on Instagram. Instagram, I'm still learning. Like I got on Instagram so I could look at my cousin's pictures, because they're all like 20 years younger than me, and they take all these glorious pictures and they do all this stuff on Instagram. And I love following them, but they are teaching me now how to actually use Instagram. So that's going to be growing as well. But yeah, I'm out here.
And you're on LinkedIn as well under Cleavon.
I am on LinkedIn under Vonne Jacobs. Yes.
So we'll put all the links in the show notes, guys. So no worries. You don't have to sit down and write it all down. Once the show notes comes out and everything, we'll have all the contact information and links in the show notes for you. So you can easily reach out to Vonne and ask for questions, hire her, or if you're in need for information, she's the woman to go to from all the things that you just heard today. And if she's not the person, I know she knows somebody who can help you.
Yes.
And with that, any other final words for our listeners?
I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been so much fun. I mean, when we connected at summer camp, it was great. And I just want to encourage your listeners to really give themselves permission to dream and dream big. You deserve that. You are worthy of that. So just give yourself permission.
But it just gives me chills. I got goosebumps. So with that, my friends, we're out of here for this week's Pursue Your Spark podcast. Please reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook at Heike Yates, or Pursue Your Spark podcast and Vonne Jacobs. All of the things that will be in the show notes. Let us know how you enjoyed this episode, how Vonne has helped you with some of those things that she mentioned, and what path you may follow or dreams you may follow after listening to this episode. And we really mean it. So reach out. And with that, my friends, I'm out of here, and I'll see you next week on the Pursue Your Spark podcast. Ciao.